Hello and welcome back to Higher Sense with Haz, and today we're going to be reviewing none other than Old Fashioned by Killian. Old Fashioned by Killian is a 2024 release, and this is loosely based on a previous discontinued fragrance by the line, which was called Single Malt. Now, as you can see, the box it comes in is fairly simplistic but neat and tidy. Looks quite elegant. And the bottle is supposed to resemble a whiskey tumbler, so to speak. Now, Killian, otherwise known as Kilian Hennessy, his grandfather owned Hennessy Cognac, which was a very famous liqueur brand. Now, Kilian Hennessy has took over the line and created his own line of fragrances, namely by Killian. Old Fashioned by Killian is a representation of a 18-year matured whiskey, and the perfumer wanted to recreate that in this fragrance. The bottle is a very thick glass, as you can see on the front. It's got the plaque, which has got the name of the fragrance and the fragrance house on it. And as I said before, this is the latest in the line of the liqueurs fragrances. The top clicks in place. Clicks well. It's fairly sturdy. It's not the best fitting of tops anyway. It is glass, I believe. Simplistic atomizer. We'll now test the atomizer, and it sprays like this. That's a good atomizer. Gives a decent spread of fragrance. Going into the notes of the fragrance, the top notes are wheat and davana. In the mid, we have immortelle and cedar. And in the base, we have tolu balsam and styrax. First impressions of this fragrance are very good, and the fragrance certainly matches the narrative that the perfumer was trying to recreate for Killian. The top notes are very apparent. The wheat and the davana being quite a herbal, green, bitter and somewhat balsamic note, blends well with the wheat and does give that whiskey-like note. It certainly comes across as boozy, it's strong and it's sweet. Going through into the mid, you have immortelle and cedar. The cedar adds a very nice woody note and undertone to the fragrance. With it being a boozy and sweet fragrance, it certainly helps to add a bit of undertone and backbone to the fragrance. Immortelle is floral, which is described as sweet, dry and hair-like. It also can resemble kind of a tobacco smell, and the sweetness I'd describe almost like honey. It's a very good addition to the fragrance and adds quite a lot to it to develop it into a liqueur-like smell. So I do think that the addition of that immortelle floral does add a lot to the fragrance and complements it very well. Moving through to the base, you have tolu balsam and styrax. These ingredients I've never really come across before, so off the top of my head I can't tell you what they're supposed to resemble, so I'll refer to some notes here. Tolu balsam is described as a rich, sweet balsamic with a vanilla, cinnamon and plum undertone. Now, I would agree that that description of this ingredient is very accurate. Now, all of the things what are described here, again, complements the fragrance. It is rich, it is sweet, it's balsamic, it's very resinous. The vanilla and cinnamon, again, adds to the sweetness of this fragrance. It's very nice. And there is a touch of plum, which does come through in this fragrance. And that's interesting because in the original formulation and original fragrance for single malt, it had a distinct plum note, which was noted. Now, plum isn't noted in the notes here. However, I'm guessing that the addition of the tolu balsam, apart from everything else that it brings to the table, adds that touch of plum, which again, in this whiskey and liqueur type of fragrance, adds a very nice little facet. Now, an interesting fact about tolu balsam is that it's a natural fixative, so it will bond to the other notes, and with it being a base note, it will help with longevity, it also binds all of the other notes to it and keeps it very stable throughout the fragrance. It's a note which blends very well with the other notes, and this is complement to the fragrance because it does seem to be very well blended. It's very smooth, it's very well rounded. There's nothing jarring to the fragrance, and there's certainly nothing that's spiky and sticks out. It blends together very well, like a fine single malt whiskey should. Now, the styrax is described as a resin. It comes across as dry and woody in its aroma, and again, with the cedar in the mid, that adds to the woodiness of the fragrance. Now, a lot of liqueurs do have a woody undertone, so again, I think this is an excellent choice in the base. Now, as I've mentioned before, the fragrance does come across as resinous and balsamic. Now, a balsam can be described as something which is heavy, it's sweet, it's warm, and it's woody. That's the impression that I do get from this fragrance. So I would describe it as balsamic. Now, if I was to describe the fragrance itself, I would describe it as an oriental fougere. The reason for that being that it is quite spicy, it does have woody undertones, and it can be seen as somewhat green with the florals that are in there, and also with it coming across as quite herbal, a touch green, slightly bitter. Again, it all adds to the liqueur and boozy notes, but I would describe this as an oriental fougere fragrance. A fougere can be described as something which is quite fresh, quite green, quite herbal, maybe a touch bitter, and I would say that that's an accurate representation of this fragrance. I think that the perfume has made an excellent representation for what the owner wanted from the fragrance, and I certainly think it's been blended very, very well. So if you like your fragrances to be quite strong, quite boozy and somewhat sweet, with quite a lot of punch and fairly in your face, then this could well be the fragrance that you're looking for. To decide whether this is the fragrance for you, there's some other things to consider. The projection on this fragrance, I would say, is fairly strong. The fragrance itself is strong, and the projection is quite representative of that. I would say that this projects a couple of feet. 2 feet would be a fairly accurate representation of my skin. The longevity, I would say, is good for a Killian fragrance. Some of them do suffer from longevity issues, but because of the ingredients that are in this fragrance, the way they've been put together, and again, the tolu balsam, along with the other woody notes, it does bind well, gives it some excellent backbone and undertone, and certainly helps to carry this fragrance along the day. I would say that this lasts anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. It's still strong and detectable all the way through that range. And again, I would say that it's slightly above average, definitely above average for a Killian fragrance. The price for Old Fashioned by Killian comes in at £210 for 50 millilitres. This works out by my math as £4.20 per milliliter. Now that is at the higher end. I would describe Killian as a niche fragrance. I wouldn't say it's a designer fragrance. I think the quality of the ingredients and the scent profile would put it as a niche fragrance, so therefore the pricing is somewhat appropriate. Looking at the fragrance profile and the price and what it delivers, I would say that the price is fair. It's a fair price for the fragrance, and certainly as an individual liqueur boozy based fragrance, if you don't have one in your collection, I think this could be a welcome addition. Looking at where to wear this fragrance, I would say a social evening or a business event where you're dressed up smartly. You could wear this on a date night, although it does come across as very boozy and strong, and that may not be the impression you want to give. It'll certainly get you noticed and grab attention. I would say mainly positive, but it would depend on the person you're with. If you're looking for a subtle fragrance that's going to blend into the background, this isn't the fragrance that you're looking for. This fragrance, I would say, is for someone who is confident, has character, likes to look smart, dress well, comes across as confident, with a good range of vocabulary, this would complement that kind of character very well. The seasons where I would wear Old Fashioned by Killian would be autumn and winter, mainly because of the strength of the fragrance, the scent profile, and also how well it projects. I certainly don't think you could wear this in the summer. It would be far too overpowering. You could get away with it in the spring, but you'd have to use very light sprays. I would say that you could apply 3 to 4 sprays of this fragrance and that would be sufficient to get the desired results. I certainly wouldn't put more than 5 or 6 sprays on, because even at 5 or 6 sprays, I think that's going to come across as quite strong and in your face, and you certainly couldn't wear it in an enclosed environment, such as a workplace, for example. So in conclusion, Old Fashioned by Killian, I would recommend this fragrance. I certainly think it hits the narrative as a liqueur, as a boozy type of scent. I would say it's strong, it's sweet, it's boozy with a woody undertone, and certainly hits the narrative that Killian was looking for. I would say this is for the confident character who wants to get noticed, and I would say that this fragrance is anything but old-fashioned.